Hey everyone, this is the No God, I'm Chiyo Natsu. In our last module, we stood at the precipice, gazing into the profound implications of meta framework awareness. We contemplated the wisdom found not in absolute certainty, but in understanding the very maps we use to chart reality, acknowledging their emergent nature, their inherent filters, their inescapable boundaries, when faced with the potentially paradoxical heart of existence. A and P0 equals 0, and we spoke of embracing the unknowing as a form of liberation, a way to dance consciously at the edge of the known. But now, having acknowledged the limits of our maps and the potential vastness of the uncharted ocean, our inquiry must inevitably turn back towards the shores we inhabit. We must ask, this reality that we do perceive, this tangible world illuminated, however partially through the enchanted veil, this physical space that emerges, seemingly stable and structured, from the underlying dynamics of virtual space, how is its specific character determined? Why this particular set of rules? Why these specific forms of matter and energy? We've accepted that our perception is filtered. But what dictates the nature of the filter itself? What shapes the light that manages to pass through the butterfly's wing, painting the world we experience? Consider how we know anything at all about the world beyond our immediate touch. Starlight travels across eons, carrying tales of distant galaxies. Subtle shifts of color reveal the composition of materials. Electromagnetic waves pulse through fiber optics, weaving our digital reality. Almost invariably, the messenger carrying the crucial information, the entity bridging the gap between object and observer, is the photon, the quantum of light, the fundamental particle of the electromagnetic field. From the simple act of seeing the screen in front of you to the most sophisticated astronomical observations peering back towards the cosmic dawn, the photon is the protagonist in the drama of perception. It seems to be the universal courier, diligently delivering messages across the stage of physical space. But what if the messenger does more than just deliver the mail? What if the nature of the messenger itself dictates the very language in which messages can be written? What if the photon, this seemingly fundamental particle of light, isn't just a passive carrier of information about reality, but an active participant in defining the rules of perceivable reality? Could it be that the properties of the photon, its constant speed, its relationship to charge, its obedience to the laws of quantum electrodynamics, are not merely descriptive features, but foundational constraints that determine what kind of information can successfully manifest and interact within our emergent physical space? What if to be considered real within our framework to be a persistent static existence result, or CRR? Capable of interaction and observation, an entity must first pass a fundamental test, a test intrinsically linked to the existence and nature of the photon itself. This module, The Boundary of Light, will explore this very question. We will delve into the possibility that the photon is far more than a messenger. It might be the gatekeeper, the standard bearer defining the very threshold of perceivable existence. Welcome back. We've just contemplated the central role of the photon, the quantum of light, as the primary messenger shaping our perception of the physical universe. We posed a crucial question. Could the nature of this messenger actually define the rules of the reality it reveals? GSISOM, the ground state information self-organizing model. It proposes a specific answer through a principle designed to bridge the gap between the underlying dynamics and our filtered experience. This principle acts as a fundamental gatekeeper for observable reality within physical space. It's called the Principle of Photon Selection, or PPS. What does PPS state? At its core, it asserts this: any information that we, as observers within physical space, can perceive or interact with must possess informational attributes that confirm the existence and properties of photons. Let's unpack that. It sounds dense, perhaps even circular, but its implications are profound. Think of it as an ontological entry requirement, a fundamental pathability check for anything aspiring to be part of our interactive, perceivable reality. There are several key facets to this principle. First, the observational foundation. PPS explicitly acknowledges that our knowledge is built upon interaction. We don't keep passively receive reality, we engage with it. And within our physical space, the primary mode of long-range engagement, the primary way information crosses the void to reach us, is via the photon. Whether it's seeing, measuring temperature via infrared red radiation, or receiving radio signals, photon is the mediator. PPS grounds our epistemology in this physical reality of interaction. Second, attribute matching and compatibility. This is the core operational mechanism. For an interaction to occur between two entities, say between an observer's detector OI and an object, there must be a shared language, a compatible set of rules. PPSS argues that because our primary observational probe is the photon, any entity that wishes to be observed must play by the rules that govern photons. It must possess properties that allow it to emit, absorb, reflect, or scatter photons in a way consistent with physical laws, specifically the laws of quantum electrodynamics, QED, and the principles tied to the speed of light, T. Think of it like trying to connect two different pieces of software. They need a common protocol, a shared API to exchange information. API for observable reality in physical space is defined by the photon. Third, self-proving existence within physical space. This leads to a fascinating implication, echoing the concept of self-proof of work, or SPO, we might explore later. An object's variability to be observed by us, its capacity to interact with photons according to the established rules, serves as a kind of ongoing validation or proof of its legitimacy as a resident of our physical space. It confirms its adherence to the emergent operational logic of this reality framework. Its interaction with light proves it belongs here, that it speaks the right language, that it respects the local rules, including those governed by the fundamental constant T. Now, how does this connect as the deeper structure of GSISOM? PPS's position not as a fundamental law of the absolute origin, A rho anon P0 equals 0, or the underlying virtual space. Instead, it is understood as a crucial emergent rule specific to our physical space. Physical space itself emerges from the self-organizing dynamics within virtual space. As physical space crystallizes and stabilizes, certain operational principles become dominant, defining how entities within it can stably exist and interact. EPS one such principle. It reflects how the underlying computation processes in virtual space manifest under the specific conditions that allow for stable structures, SERs, and observers like us to emerge. It acts as a fundamental information filtering mechanism. The infinite potentiality of information transcendence, IT, and the full complexity of the virtual space or dynamic existent state dynamics are filtered through the bottleneck of emergence and the necessity of stable, observable interaction. PP finds the specific passband of reality accessible to photon-mediated observation. So, the principle of photon selection proposes a universe where observability isn't guaranteed. Existence within the foundational reality, the virtual space or DES, might be vastly broader and operate under different rules, but to participate in our observable reality, to cross the threshold into physical space and engage with us, information must conform to the photon standard. It must acquire the attributes that allow it to dance with light. This principle doesn't necessarily explain the origin of the photon itself, that likely traces back to deeper virtual space dynamics and symmetries. But it explains why the photon holds such a privileged position in shaping the reality we experience. It sets the stage for understanding why the speed of light T might be far more than just a speed limit. It might be the defining characteristic of the very fabric of existence woven by light itself. We've just explored the principle of photon selection, idea that perceivable reality in our physical space is fundamentally constrained by the properties of the photon, the messenger of light. Now we take a radical step further, guided by GSISOM, to reconsider one of the most foundational constants of that reality, that speed of light, chi. Conventionally, c is presented as the universe's ultimate speed limit, the cosmic speed barrier that nothing with mass can reach, and which massless particle photons must always travel at. Special relativity is built upon its constancy. But GSISOM, viewing reality through the lens of information emerging from a deeper source, invites us to ask, is c merely a limit? Is it something more profound? The proposition put forward in Title 1, Grounded in GSISOM and PPS, the speed of light, is not just a limit imposed upon existence, it is a fundamental form of existence within physical space. What does this mean? It means that qi isn't simply a rule governing how things move within physical space. It's a defining characteristic of how information manifests as existence in physical space. It's woven into the very fabric of observable being. How can we understand this ontologically? Let's look at it from the GSISOM perspective. First, qi as a foundational output of virtual space computation. Recall that physical space emerges from the computational processes occurring within the underlying geometric virtual space. GSISOM suggests that fundamental constants governing physical space, like c, are not arbitrary values, but are effective parameters, stable outputs, generated by these deeper virtual space computations. A c represents a core operational parameter that is projected from the computational substrate onto the emergent stage. It defines the intrinsic rate or scale at which information can stably propagate, and interactions can occur within this specific emergent reality framework. Second, the photon self-proof via qi. The photon itself provides constant validation for this idea. Whereas high action requires compatibility. The photon's existence is inextricably linked to xi, must travel at c to exist as a photon within physical space. Its unwavering adherence to the speed is its continuous self, proof of work as Pao, constantly affirming a keka as defining characteristic of its mode of being. It cannot slow down or speed up in vacuum without ceasing to be a photon as we know it. Third, as the base frequency or fundamental unit, we can think of the qi photophorically as the fundamental clock speed or base frequency set by the virtual space computation for the manifestation of information within physical space. All dynamic processes, all energy propagation, all causal influence within physical space unfolds according to this fundamental rhythm. It's the underlying tempo against which all events in physical space are measured. It defines the relationship between space and time units within this emergent framework. This perspective profoundly reframes how we understand different forms of existence in relation to qi massless particles. Like photons, for entities possessing no rest mass, traveling at c is not a choice or limit. It is their only possible way to exist within the physical space framework. Their entire being is defined by this light speed propagation. It is the inherent form dictated by the virtual space output and validated by PPS. Massive particles like electrons, protons. These entities representing more complex, localized condensations of information cells cannot reach c. Mass itself, within this view, might represent a form of structural stability or informational complexity, the pi over m aspect, that intrinsically resists acceleration to the foundational propagation c d speed, the e over c aspect. However, their existence is still fundamentally structured by c. Their internal dynamics involve processes operating near at c. More importantly, their interactions with the rest of the universe are mediated by fields or particles whose propagation is governed by qi. Even if the arc itself moves slowly, the messages it sends and receives, the very forces holding it together, operate according to the light speed standard. Their inertia is part of the specific form of existence, but that form is defined in relation to qi. Therefore, qi is not just a traffic law for the cosmic highway, it's embedded in the very asphalt, the structure of the vehicles, and the timing of the signals. It is a fundamental parameter defining the operational logic and the possible modes of being for any information pattern that manifests stably within our physical space. It is the imprint of the virtual space computation, the rhythm set by the foundational dynamics made manifest and observable through the filter of photon selection. We've just journeyed to a new understanding of the speed of light, EC, within the GSISOM framework. Guided by the principle of photon selection, qi emerges not merely as a speed limit, but as a fundamental form of existence imprinted onto our physical space, a reflection of deeper computations in virtual space. If qi defines the very structure of existence within physical space, how does this perspective reshape our understanding of the universe's most familiar constituents, matter and energy? Traditionally, we think of matter as solid stuff possessing mass, and energy is the capacity to do work, perhaps flowing as waves or residing in fields. GSISOM, however, grounded in its information ontology, invites us to see both matter and energy as different manifestations, different organizational forms of the same fundamental substance of information. And crucially, both of these forms are intrinsically structured by and owe their specific characteristics to the underlying logic defined by Qi. Let's look at matter first. Matter as condensed information. From the GSISOM perspective, matter represents information that has undergone a significant process of condensation and stabilization. Imagine the infinite potentiality flowing from the foundational source being channeled by attractors and stability AS dynamics. Matter Ma arises when this information becomes localized, forming regions of high informational density that achieve dynamic stability. These are the complex static existence results CRs. The perhaps conceptualized as stable loops or knots in the underlying path network, or as points where void confinement dominates. They possess structure, boundaries, and the relative persistence. Matter's relation to truth. While seemingly static or slow, moving compared to light, matter's existence remains fundamentally tethered to phi. Consider its internal dynamics, as mentioned, the internal workings of matter. Quarks vibrating within protons. Electrons orbiting nuclei involve fundamental processes operating as approach speeds or governed by Qi. The stability of matter relies on these rapid internal dynamics maintaining equilibrium. Consider interaction via Qi. E forces holding matter together are mediated by fields whose influence propagates at Qi. Matter interacts with the rest of the universe through channels paced by the speed of light. Consider inertia as resistance to the mass mi. The defining property of matter can be understood as the measure of this condensed structure's resistance to changing its state of motion relative to the foundational Erzi dynamic. It's the structural inertia pushing against the pure dynamism. Matter is structured information whose form intrinsically relates to the C framework. Now, let's consider energy. Energy as dispersed information in contrast to matter, energy particularly in forms like electromagnetic radiation and photons, represents a more diffuse, often propagating form of information. It's information on the move, less confined to stable structures. Think of it as the informational current flowing between the condensed nodes of matter, close to the unconfined dynamics of the foundational DES or virtual space. This energy's relation to key energies linked to Qi is often more direct and obvious. Propagation at Qi fundamental energy carriers like photons inherently travel at speed Qi. Their existence is propagating at speed Qi. Speed, the transfer of energy across space via fields, is governed by Qi. Manifestation of the E over C pole energy, especially in its dynamic propagating form, strongly reflects the generative dynamic E over C pole of the cosmic balance. It is the universe's capacity for change and influence made manifest. This brings us to perhaps the most famous equation in physics, E equals mc squared. E equals mc squared as information transformation. From the GSISOM informational perspective, this equation takes on a profound ontological meaning beyond simple mass energy conversion. It represents the fundamental equivalence and convertibility between these two primary forms of informational manifestation within physical space. It states that condensed, structured information C matter, mu, is equivalent to a vast amount of dynamic, potentially propagating information in energy, E. It describes the process of information transformation, structured, localized information. M can dissolve its confining boundaries, an aspect of void opening, and be released as dynamic, propagating information, i.e., and vice versa with energy condensing to matter, reflecting void confinement. The role of C squared, the crucial factor for it, emerges not just as a conversion constant, but as representing the intrinsic relationship between the dynamic form of existence and the structured form of existence, represented by M. Squaring E key might signify the intensity or density, factor associated with the dynamic energy field required to constitute or be released from stable structure. It quantifies the energetical cost or yield of converting between the universe's fundamental modes of being, structure and becoming, dynamics, reflecting the deep balance derived ultimately from the equilibrium between E over C and pi over m. Therefore, matter and energy are not fundamentally different substances, but different states or configurations of the underlying reality, information, as it manifests within the specific C structured framework of our physical space. Matter is information condensed and stabilized according to the rules incorporating C. Energy is information flowing and propagating according to the rules defined by C. And E equals mc squared is the fundamental equation governing the transformation between these states, revealing the deep unity beneath their apparent difference. A unity ultimately rooted in the paradoxical source A naught P0 equals 0 and the dynamic balance it necessitates. We've reframed our understanding. The speed of light, a key, is not just a cosmic speed limit, but a fundamental form defining how information manifests as matter and energy within our physical space. Matter and energy themselves are different informational configurations, both intrinsically structured by this C logic. This brings us to a crucial question that has puzzled physicists and philosophers alike at why. Why is C the absolute limit? Why can anything information influence spacecraft travel faster than light within our observable universe? Special relativity posits the constancy and limiting nature of say, as a fundamental axiom, but doesn't explain its origin. GSISOM, through the principle of photon selection, PPS, offers a potential explanation rooted not in arbitrary decree, but in the very logic of observation and interaction within an emergent reality. PS provides the missing piece, the logical underpinning for why the light speed barrier appears absolute within our frame of reference. Let's walk through the logical steps derived from PPS, as outlined in Title 1. Step 1, interaction requires compatibility. This is the cornerstone. For any meaningful interaction to occur within physical space, whether it's measurement, communication, or physical influence, the interacting entities must share a compatible language, a common operational framework, a consistent form of existence. You can't plug a European appliance directly into an American socket without an adapter. Their forms are incompatible. Similarities within physical space must possess compatible informational structures and obey shared interaction rules to connect. Step 2T. The photon's form of existence is intrinsically linked to C. As we established, the photon's very being within physical space is propagation at speed c. Its fundamental properties, its adherence to QED, its role as the mediator of electromagnetism, all are defined within the framework where C is the foundational parameter. Aim of existence C, defined from a step-step through fundamental interactions in physical space, are universally mediated by AC governed entities. This is where PPS exerts its full force. PPS states that our observable reality is defined by photon interactions. But the implication extends further within the physical space framework that emerges consistently with PPS. All fundamental interactions responsible for causality and information transfer appear to be mediated by entities that operate according to the C logic. This includes real photons carrying electromagnetic force, virtual particles whose influence still respects the underlying field propagation limits set by C. Even potentially other force carriers whose existence and interaction rules emerge in the same physical space framework fundamentally structured around key as a core parameter derived from virtual space. Essentially, the communication protocols of our emergent physical space are universally written in the language of C. Step 40. The logical consequence of Chi becomes the absolute limit for observable interaction. Putting these pieces together leads to an almost inescapable conclusion if all interactions necessary for observation, communication, and causal influence within our physical space must occur through entities or fields operating under the C defined form of existence, then key necessarily becomes the de facto absolute speed limit for any process within that observable framework. Why? Because attempting to send information or exert influence faster than C would require using a mechanism or entity whose fundamental form of existence is incompatible with the established EC governed interaction rules of our physical space. Such a hypothetical superluminal signal or entity would not be based on photons, thus falling outside the direct observational filter of PPS, would likely violate the fundamental parameters like C itself, derived from the virtual space computation that define our specific physical space framework would lack the necessary compatible attributes to interact meaningfully with the CR's matter detectors that constitute our world, which are themselves structured according to the C logic. Therefore, anything exceeding Ki would effectively exist outside the self, consistent operational rules and observational possibilities of our physical space. It wouldn't just be fast. It would be operating under a different reality framework, unable to interface with ours in a way we could measure or utilize. It would be like trying to run incompatible software. It simply doesn't function within the established operating system of our physical space. The limit arises not from a cosmic speed trap, but from fundamental ontological incompatibility, defined by the rules of emergence and observation. Crucial distinction: physical space limit versus virtual space potential. It is vital to remember the GSISOM context. This limit dosed is proposed a feature of the emergent physical space, shaped by the specific VO space computation that generated it, and the PPS filter through which we observe it. It does not necessarily imply that the underlying virtual space or the foundational dynamics near N and PP0 equals 0 are themselves bound by EC. Virtual space might possess vastly different, potentially non-local or faster, than C modes of information processing. The Chi limit is the speed limit on the observable highway, not necessarily within the hidden hyperspace from which the highway emerges. So, the reason nothing travels faster than light in our experience isn't just an arbitrary rule. According to GSISOM and PPS, it's a profound consequence of how our specific reality is constructed, and how we are able to perceive it. It's the boundary defined by the very messenger that brings us news of the cosmos, the photon itself. We've journeyed through the boundary of light, exploring the universe through the lens of GSISOM and the Principle of Photon Selection, PPS. We've reimagined the photon not just as a messenger, but as a gatekeeper defining the threshold of observable reality. We've reconsidered the speed of light, Chi, not merely as a limit, but as a fundamental form of existence woven into the fabric of our physical space, an emergent parameter derived from deeper virtual space computations. We saw matter and energy as different informational forms structured by this C logic, their transformation governed by E equals mc squared. And finally, we understood the light as speed limit itself as a logical consequence of the PPS filter, a boundary onto ontological compatibility required for interaction within our observable framework. Now, unit, we step back to see how these potentially radical ideas resonate with, challenge, and perhaps deepen our understanding of established physics. We'll also address some immediate questions that might arise and look towards the horizons this perspective opens. Echoes in existing physics. How does this GSISOM PPS perspective connect with the cornerstones of modern physics? Special relativity. Rather than start censoring with the constancy of Ki as an unexplained postulate, the GSISOM PPS framework offers a potential ontological reason for it. She is constant because it's a fundamental output parameter of the virtual space computation defining our physical space. And PPS ensures that our observations are intrinsically locked into this C-defined framework. Relativity becomes a description of the operational logic within this PPS filtered, structured emergent reality. Quantum electrodynamics, QED. QED masterfully describes the interaction of light and matter. PPS complements this by providing a context. These specific QED interactions are precisely the photon-compatible attributes required for entities to be observable and persist within physical space. PPS highlights why these specific rules are so central to our perceived LCD reality. They are the rules of the dominant observational channel. General relativity, GR, describes gravity as the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy. Within GSISO, matter and energy are seen as localized, stable concentrations of information, ERs, or informational attractors. Space-time itself is an emergent structure. GR can then be reinterpreted as describing how these emergent informational concentrations interact with the emergent space-time structure, whose fundamental dynamics, including propagation speed related to C, are set by the underlying virtual space or DS. Gravity becomes the large-scale structural consequence of information interacting with its emergent geometric environment an environment already fundamentally shaped by Qi. Quantum gravity and cosmology, this framework naturally invites connections. Could Qi be related to fundamental or pixel size or processing speed, tau sub u, of the underlying virtual space computation? Could the early universe, before physical space fully stabilized, have operated under different rules or effective constants? Could dark matter and energy be entities or dynamics operating outside the primary PPS filter, GSISOM? With its focus on emergence from information and potential layers of reality, virtual space and physical space offers a rich conceptual playground for these frontier questions. Addressing potential questions, naturally, this perspective raises immediate questions, two of which are briefly addressed in the original paper at title One Country Tachyons. What about hypothetical faster than light particles? The PPS framework doesn't strictly rule out their existence in simple principle within the broader GSISOM reality. However, it clearly states why we wouldn't observe them, lacking the photon-compatible attributes. They cannot interact with our physical space in instruments or senses. They would exist outside our boundary of light, invisible and causally disconnected from our observable world. Quantum entanglement. Doesn't entanglement involve instantaneous correlations? While entanglement shows profound, non-local correlations, potentially rooted in virtual space interconnectedness, established physics confirms it cannot be used for faster than light communication of information. You can't use entangled particles to send a message instantly. Therefore, entanglement, while hinting at deeper realities beyond simple physical space locality, doesn't violate the Koatsukoto principle regarding the limits of observable interaction and information transfer within our physical space framework governed by C summary and the path forward. Let's bring the threads together. This module, guided by GSISOM's Title 1, proposes the Principle of Photon Selection as a key to understanding our perceived reality. PPS posits that observability requires compatibility with photon interactions. This elevates Qi from a mere speed limit to a fundamental form of existence within physical space, derived from underlying virtual space computations. Matter and energy become different informational forms structured by Qi. The light speed limit emerges as a consequence of ontological compatibility required for interaction within the PPS-defined observable universe. This perspective offers a potentially unifying lens, connecting relativity, quantum mechanics, and cosmology back to deeper informational principles and the conditions of observation. But, like all profound explorations, it opens more doors than it closes. The original paper highlights crucial areas for future investigation, formalization, developing a rigorous mathematical language for PPS and its connection to virtual space computations. How exactly does Qi emerge? Mechanisms, detailing the specific computational or self-organizational mechanisms within virtual space that lead to the stable physical space framework and its characteristic constants. Verification, exploring potential, even if highly indirect, observational or experimental avenues to test these ideas. Could precision measurements of T under extreme conditions or subtle cosmological signatures offer clues? Integration, deepening the connection between this framework and active research frontiers like quantum gravity, the nature of dark energy and matter, and the very early universe. And perhaps most intriguingly, the concepts explored here raise a further question, serving as a natural bridge to explore our next sections within the GSISOM tapestry. If interaction with photons, adherence to T, is necessary for being observable within physical space, is there also a continuous active process required simply to be? If existence relies on interaction and adherence to rules, must entities constantly prove their right to exist within this dynamic cosmos? This question leads us directly towards the concept of self, proof of work, a principle suggesting that existence itself is an ongoing, active validation. That will be a key theme as we continue our journey into the heart of the GSISO universe. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the boundary of light. This is Chiyo Natsu for the No God. Keep questioning the frame, keep charting the space.